Thanks for tuning in to the Ocean Lab live from Antarctica with Blue Green Expeditions. Today's presenters are Dr. Amy Moran and scientific diver John Humphreys. And without further ado, over to you.
Well, we're excited to be here. We are here on the Ortelius, which is a cruise ship, which is doing a citizen science and science cruise to the Antarctic. We're both super excited to be here. My name is Amy Moran. I am a professor at the University of Hawaii, and I study marine biology, and I have been going to the Antarctic for about 20 years. This is my 9th visit, and I'm very excited to be here. And I am a scuba diver, as is John, my co-host. So John, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
Absolutely. I'm John Humphreys. I'm 15 years old. I live in Florida. I've been a scientific diver for the past 3 years, working mainly down in the Keys in coral restoration, scientific diving of all types, and really learning as much as I can. And finally, I'm getting to come down to Antarctica and dive with people like Dr. Moran and get to do some pretty awesome stuff down here.
So John, so I've been a scientific diver for a long time, but you're obviously quite new to it. You're the youngest person that I know of that's ever dived in the Antarctic. How did you get into it, and what did you have to do to prepare?
Antarctica has always just kind of been calling to me. It's a really special place, and as an aspiring astronaut, I look at Antarctica and I think it's probably one of the closest things on Earth to going to another planet. And how I got into scientific diving is I joined a youth scientific diving program called SCUBAnauts International, where I started diving down in the Keys and all over, getting AAUS scientific diver certified and learning as much as I can to become a better, more aware diver, and helping out as much as I can.
That's great. Yeah. And the AAUS is the American Academy of Underwater Sciences, and it's a standard setting organization that basically sets the rules for scientific diving in the United States and in other parts of the world. And it's a very rigorous training
Absolutely.
Program, as I'm sure. How long did it take you to get trained to be a scientific diver?
It probably took me about 6 months to get fully trained because you need to have 100 hours of scientific training.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about Antarctic scuba diving. How about that? So,
Absolutely.
As a scientist, I study marine invertebrates, which are cold-blooded things, and the cold-blooded animals in the Antarctic live in the coldest water in the world, right? So that makes them biologically really interesting. Like, just how does an animal work at below the freezing temperature of fresh water, right? Just how does that all function? One of the weird things about Antarctic invertebrates is that some of them reach very, very large sizes. This is called polar gigantism. So I've studied that, and I'm currently down here now looking for marine diseases. So one of the unfortunate things that's happening to the oceans as the climate changes is that marine diseases are getting more common and widespread. Sea star wasting syndrome is the one that I'm studying down here. We very recently found it in the Antarctic, and it's this terrible starfish illness where they just sort of disintegrate and fall apart, and it's been very common on the west coast of North America for the last 10 or 20 years. So that's what I'm down here studying. But scientific diving in the Antarctic is a whole big thing.
Absolutely.
Just diving at all in the Antarctic. So John, you want to talk a little bit about what we have to wear to dive in the very cold water? First of all, how cold is the water here?
The water here is freezing, literally. 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. So it is at the freezing point for fresh water. 29 degrees is when the ice starts to form in salt water. And we have to wear some pretty specialized gear to be able to dive down here. One of which is right next to you, a dry suit. Some of you might have heard of something called a wetsuit. A wetsuit is a neoprene suit that you wear, and basically it traps a layer of water between your skin and the suit. And we still have the same thing with a hood, but around our entire body we wear this dry suit, which is basically what you'll see astronauts wearing to a different degree, and the fact that it completely traps air to where it keeps us warm. So we're wearing a lot of layers, like what I'm wearing right now, and even some more to keep us warm in the frigid Antarctic waters. And then on our head,
The hood.
we have a hood.
Would you like to put that on?
I would
I'm
love-
kidding. Why
I
don't
would
you
love
put that
to
on
put
for us, John? That
this
would be
hood on.
amazing.
And what's
Absolutely.
that hood made out of?
So this hood is made out of neoprene, if you'd like to talk about that while I'm putting it on.
Neoprene is an insulating material that I wouldn't say it keeps you warm in the Antarctic, but it keeps you warm enough to stay in the water for 30 to 40 minutes, which is about how long we've been diving for. Very good look. John, what part of you gets the coldest when you're diving here?
Part of me that gets the coldest is probably my
Hands. Yep, that's the big problem. And to show you what we wear, or what I wear on my hands, are these lovely 3-fingered dry gloves that attach to your hood, to your suit. And it's very difficult, really, to do anything when you're wearing them. So, so what we can do underwater, we can get there, we can see things, we can collect things, it's amazing, but of course, you're just not as coordinated.
Absolutely.
And we need a lot of air for insulation, and
We
to
do.
offset that, what do we use?
We use a weight belt.
A weight
Or a
belt.
weight harness.
This has about 40 pounds of lead in it, so 2 of us can pick it up to show it to you. So we're wearing 40 pounds of lead, big steel tank, dry suit, underwear, gloves, hoods. It's hard to move.
It is very difficult.
But fabulously beautiful underwater.
Well, and that's absolutely true. As you can see, she has kind of a mitten. And so above water, mittens and gloves, you would wear mittens to keep your hands much warmer, but you're going to have a lot less dexterity. And when you need more dexterity, you can wear these types of gloves to where you can move all fingers individually. However, your hands are going to get colder a lot faster. So it's kind of that trade-off there. Are you going to do a shorter dive that requires more technical ability, or are you going to do a much longer dive to where you need that warmth? The dry suit, because it's completely sealed, what happens is the dry suit starts to squeeze because the pressure of the ocean that is on top of you, it's multiple atmospheres of pressure as you descend, it starts to literally compress the suit onto you. And so to counteract that on this suit, you see you have this valve to where you attach an air hose to where you can press on here to add more air into the suit. So when you start to feel that squeeze, you'll press that button to fill up with air, and that'll also keep you more buoyant in the water to offset this weight as well.
And then when you go up, of course, the air in your suit expands. So to keep yourself from popping to the surface like a cork, you use this valve to dump air out of your suit as it expands. So it's sort of a constant vigilance of the amount of air in your suit.
And that's why dry suit diving requires a whole nother certification to learn how to do it and the important safety that's behind it.
And we had a question too as well about, are you able to repair those on the ship should they get a hole? What happens?
Absolutely. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. Well, some things you can fix and some things you can't. We are very fortunate to be here with a wonderful woman who can fix almost anything when it goes wrong on a suit. Yeah, it depends on what goes wrong. So the seals, the neck seals, are sort of a weak point, and they will often tear, but many of them can be replaced. They're sort of like a Ziploc bag connector that you can put them on with. The zipper is probably the next most fragile thing, and when the zipper goes, you need a new suit, pretty much.
Yes.
Little holes and little leaks are pretty common too. Those can be patched if you can find them. Usually you know your suit is leaking because there's water coming in, and it's you don't really know how to find it necessarily. So I would say dry suits last a few years. So yes, we can repair some things on this ship, other things
We can't.
no. Yep.
I would love to hear a bit more about the work that you're doing Amy, with, I know that you just had a recent new development that was published. So would you share a little bit about your research with us?
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit. I don't bore people now about sea spiders. When I was working on a project on polar gigantism and cold temperature metabolism, which was a larger project, one of the great mysteries in sea spider biology, if you can imagine this is a mystery going back about 140 years, was when the first person started thinking about it, is that in most sea spiders, which are distant relatives of land spiders, the males actually care for the young. And so they're one of the rare groups of animals like seahorses where the females lay eggs and leave the male to take care of them. And that's just sort of a flip-flop of the usual parental roles, right? So it's very interesting. But the giant sea spiders, the giant Antarctic ones, which are bright orange and have these very long legs and get to be about this big, and so they're some of the most famous sea spiders because they're huge. No one had ever seen the males carrying eggs. Never been seen in 140 years. And people have been thinking about this for a really long time. And I was at McMurdo Station working on other things, and I had 2 graduate students with me who were absolutely determined to crack that nut. They were like, we're gonna figure this out. And I was like, you'll never figure it out. But they were determined, so we went out and we found some sea spiders that looked like they were mating in the field, very carefully collected them, brought them back into the lab and watched them. And we were able to figure it out. It was amazing. So one of them, or 2 sets actually, the female released eggs, the female left, and then the male spent about 2 days carefully pasting them down on the bottom into this beautiful little egg mass. And then with wonderful support from the United States Antarctic Program, we were able to have someone take pictures of those eggs every week for about 8 months in the Antarctic. And we saw what they looked like when they were hatched. So it was a very, because it's giant Antarctic sea spiders, I think it's interesting to a lot of people just because it's so strange. But it was a really neat moment, natural history moment for all of us to understand something brand new about these really cool organisms.
And there's also some research you've been doing on the sea star wasting disease. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, well, sea star wasting disease is a very sort of spectacular and kind of tragic thing where the starfish just start to sort of disintegrate, and they get little holes, they get white patches, and then they get little holes in their bodies, and then the whole thing just disintegrates. And this has been seen, it's been seen for a long time, like all over the world in sort of little episodic outbreaks. But recently in North America, all up and down the West Coast, there's been very large die-offs of starfish, great concern about it, big changes in the ecosystem because the starfish are what are called keystone predators. They eat, they're just important parts of the ecosystem. So things change when you take them away. And it was thought that cold water was protective, but fairly recently we saw 2 pretty big outbreaks of this in the coldest part of the Antarctic, on the other side of the continent from where we are now in McMurdo Station. And there just aren't a lot of eyes in the water in the Antarctic. There just aren't a lot of people diving and looking for things like this. So one of the great opportunities on a cruise like this is that we can go to a whole lot of different places and dive and look. So that's what we've been doing, and we have found one site with some evidence of it, and then the other sites have seemed okay, which is good.
Which is awesome.
yeah, it's good news.
How about we hear more about your journey in the underwater exploration and just all the things you've been doing, John, because you are such an accomplished young man and you have done so many things already in your life. If there were a young person out there watching right now who's seeing you and learning about you for the first time and admiring the fact that you are now a polar diver and officially have dived in a part of the world that so few people get to see, where would someone begin that journey? What do you think?
Well, I think all you have to do is take the first step. That's the most important step. And so looking around, finding a local dive shop that's right for you and getting into diving, seeing if you really like it, if that's something you want to do. If it's not, that's totally okay. It's not for everybody. And you can find something else amazing that is for you. But if you like diving and you love diving and you want to get into it and do what I do and polar diving and what Dr. Moran does with her research, then take the first step, get involved. There's plenty of programs out there like SCUBAnauts International, which is how I got into scientific diving. But there's plenty more. Look around, do some research, and see if it's right.
What are the creatures you've seen, topside and underwater, since you've been here on the Ortelius, the MV Ortelius? What have you been seeing? What are the critters?
Well, we've seen a bunch of seals, both in and out of the water. Weddell seals, fur seals, leopard seals. We've seen all 3 types of brush-tailed penguins. We've seen Adelies, chin straps, and gentoos. Let's see, we've seen a bunch of starfish and sea stars.
Underwater, I think we've probably seen about 8 or 9 species of starfish. Lots of healthy ones, a few sick ones. We've seen one sea spider.
Right.
And a whole lot of sponges and bryozoans and kelp and limpets. There's a lot of limpets down there. Just a lot of really pretty amazing, beautiful marine life. It's been a treat.
Absolutely.
And other divers. It's fun.
We have.
Yeah.
And even though it's not an animal, we've seen a bunch of really pretty icebergs and a lot of life around them.
Speaking of pretty icebergs, there are some really lovely things floating by in the scenery right now.
There are.
I'm going to try to go over to the window to show everybody. So here we go. So what I'd like to do now is to open up any questions anyone has for us. I know we had a very large group of 100 third and fourth graders who are tuning in and watching right now. And I would love to ask anyone to chime in with any questions you have. Ooh, we have questions pouring in. How many dives do you expect to make on this trip?
Maybe 8 or 9, I would say.
Yeah.
I think we've done, 6 so far?
Yep. We got a few days left.
That's individually. Total, more than that, I don't know.
And the Drake Passage, as we were crossing, was actually very calm. We had an incredibly calm journey south.
Yes. One of the calmest.
That's very unusual, though. It's famous for rough seas and seasickness.
In fact, it was so calm that we actually sent a team of divers out to go diving and collect plankton and surveys.
Can you describe what sea spiders look like?
So,
This is a sea spider.
what you can see on a sea spider is little tiny body, big proboscis that they use to stick into things and suck body fluids out, and then just all these long legs. And there's just so many weird things about sea spiders. One of them is that they just have this little tiny body, so actually their stomachs go all the way out into each one of their legs. So they do all their digestion in their legs, which is just one weird thing about them. Lots of weird things about sea spiders.
We like sea spiders. And the question, how big exactly can they get? What's like the biggest sea spider that you know of on record?
Oh, well, this one's pretty big. I don't know if you can see, there's a hand in there for scale. And size, I guess it depends on if you're talking about weight or length, but I have a picture of one on a dinner plate and the legs are hanging over the edge. So that's the biggest one I've seen.
So maybe it could like beyond about 12 inches maybe or so?
I've heard 50 centimeters. I've never seen one that big, but that's supposed to be the record.
Florida Homeschooling Aqua Steam and Dive Group says, thank you so much. We really enjoyed this morning and this presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in with us this morning. We are so fortunate to have the Wi-Fi to do this at all. We have more questions. How cold does the ocean get where you are diving?
I believe the coldest place that we were diving was south of the Antarctic Circle. And the coldest it got on my computer was 32 degrees, so freezing temperatures. But if we were to go more south, I'm sure eventually we would have hit the 29, where...
-2. The air gets a lot colder, of course,
yes,
but the water doesn't get below, it gets a little below the freezing temperature of seawater.
Have you noticed changes in the size of Antarctica?
Well, we were just at Palmer Station, and someone who had been there before
Yes.
commented that the glacier has receded. There was a big glacier right behind it, and just in the last 10 years has receded tremendously.
Yes.
And that's, that's well known. That's been happening. So there's been a lot of melting of the glaciers in this part of the Antarctic.
Supposedly what I heard about Palmer Station was when they built the station, the glacier was right up on it, and now it is 3 miles away.
One more question. What other animals have you seen?
Sea spider, anemones, sea anemones,
Sea anemones.
starfish, sponges. We saw tardigrade yesterday under a microscope. We have some people looking at things under microscopes, which is a lot of fun. Snails, limpets, nudibranchs. We've seen some nudibranchs, if you all know what those are.
Lots of plankton,
Lots of
diatoms,
plankton.
phytoplankton, zooplankton.
And then leopard seals, penguins, lots and lots of penguins.
Lots of
We've
penguins.
seen 3 or 4 different
Whales.
species of penguins. Whales. Yeah, so
And,
yeah, a lot of different
speaking
things.
of penguins, the question, how tall are penguins, has come in.
Depends on the
Well,
species.
yes. Some species are a lot bigger than others, like the emperor penguin. Could probably reach the size of a small child. And then you have the king that's right below that, and then gentoo penguins, which have been penguins that we've been seeing.
If you wanted to hug one, you'd have to go down on your knees and
About-
hug it, because
About this tall.
you're not allowed to hug them, but
Nope, no hugs.
we all want to.
No
Nope.
penguin hugs. Oh, this is a cool question. Are you diving the icebergs or just around?
We have dove an iceberg or two. We went to the iceberg graveyard, which is where the icebergs, they come up to where the floor gets shallow and the icebergs get grounded so they can't flow with the water anymore. So they just kind of stay there and melt away. And so we got to dive there on stable icebergs, and then other times we've just been diving in the vicinity of icebergs.
And you have to be very careful diving around icebergs, because by their nature, they're falling apart, and you don't want to be there when they fall apart.
So that iceberg is unstable, which means it's not touching the ground. It's freely moving, which means it's really deep here.
Ooh, let's check out that iceberg. Have you seen ice caves?
We have, from the boat. I've seen a lot of ice caves in the sides of the glaciers,
Yes.
and you can see some of the way into them. They just look spectacular.
They're very, very blue, and they look really interesting compared to the white of the glacier and the ice.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful day from the end of the world.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.